I'm in the point of my career now, after 33 years, where I've stepped back from the company. I own it. I own 100% of the shares, but my team runs the company, quite frankly, Jason, way better than I ever did. I was not interested in the details. I was just, I was the guy in the crow's nest looking over the horizon, shouting orders down on the deck.
Imagine spending millions on a product launch only to have it fail because of a pinhead smear of residue that shorted a circuit. Well, today's guest is the guy who you want to call to keep that nightmare from happening. You want to call him. And so let's talk about that. Well, welcome back to The Root of All Success. I am the real Jason Duncan. This is episode number 311. My guest is Mike Konrad. He's the founder and CEO of Aqueous Technologies. He's also the vice president of communications for SMTA. He's the host of both the Reluctant Entrepreneur podcast and the Reliability Matters podcast. And for 4 decades, Mike has led the charge on contamination removal and electronics reliability, designing cleaning systems used on 6 continents and shaping global industry standards. Mike, welcome to The Root of All Success.
Thanks, Jason. It's nice to see you.
All right. So you have spent 40 years chasing microscopic contaminants.
Yeah.
What's the...
Isn't that exciting?
That is very exciting. Very good for cocktail conversations.
Yeah, it's amazing if you don't want to get involved in a conversation on an airplane or a cocktail party. Just tell them you're a contamination specialist in the electronics manufacturing industry. And before you can even say the word industry, you see their back walking away. It's great.
Well, today we're going to do a little bit of your entrepreneur story, and we're going to talk a little bit technical stuff. So people who are in the electronics industry are really going to like some of this. So let's talk about this. What's the single biggest reliability myth still keeping electronics founders up at night?
I'll just go down a shallow rabbit hole, just to put it in context. Prior to 1989, all circuit boards, after they were assembled, after all the components were soldered onto the circuit boards, they were cleaned because the soldering process is messy, and there are contaminants on boards through a number of different means. So they would be components would be placed on them, and then they would be soldered, and then they would be cleaned. And then in 1989, there was a treaty called the Montreal Protocol, signed by originally 11 nations, and then eventually every UN member nation ratified it, which was banning the solvents that were used to clean circuit boards. These solvents contained chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, and 2 things happened. One was you couldn't buy those solvents anymore, and the second is Big Macs no longer were sold in a styrofoam box. They had to go paper because styrofoam also contains CFCs. The necessity is the mother of invention, as it said. So I came up with a technology that would not use those banned solvents and that would use something environmentally friendly. And at the same time, the manufacturers of the flux is used in soldering, and that's primarily where the contaminants came up with a new formulation, which they called no clean flux. You could just leave it on. And for years, that was successful. For decades, that was successful. And today it isn't, because of a number of reasons we can get into. But the myth is from electronic manufacturers that the bottle of flux says no clean, so they interpret that as don't clean, so they think they don't need to clean. And in our electronics world today, more than any other time in history, circuit assemblies are failing at a alarming rate and costing companies millions of dollars. In fact, a few years ago, it cost Microsoft, the manufacturer of the Xbox 360, more than $1.15 billion to recall because there were contaminants on the assembly, and due to a number of other factors, caused the boards to fail. So the biggest reliability threat in our industry, besides just building them wrong, is relying on the label that says no clean, which they interpret as I don't have to clean, and wondering why your boards are failing 6 months to 2 years after they're deployed into the field.
Well, take us back to 1992. And what was the pain point that was so brutal that you left a steady job to start Aqueous Technologies in your garage?
Yeah, I call myself kind of a reluctant entrepreneur because I didn't have an entrepreneurial bone in my body. I was a great salesman. That was my core talent, if you will. I'm good at sales, and I was a sales manager for a company that built soldering equipment. And when I saw this Montreal Protocol thing coming, and I saw the industry freaking out that how are we going to clean boards? And there are no new solvents coming out that were any good, that were green. I had an idea to come up with an alternate technology for cleaning boards. This is just before No Clean Flux came out on the market. And I thought this was great. So I pitched it to my boss, and he wasn't interested. And I pitched it again, and he wasn't interested. So I sweetened the pot, and I said, look, I'm a pretty clever designer. I was always very techie. I said, what if I design the machine? My time, my money, my risk, and then bring it to you and see what you think. And he's like, okay, fine, but no company time. I'm like, okay, fine. So I converted my garage to a mad scientist studio and developed a machine and eventually finished it with a childhood friend of mine and shipped it over to my company, my employer, and he liked it. It looked sexy. It from an engineering standpoint. And he said, "Does it work?" I'm like, "Yeah, it works better than we expected it to." And I said, "I'll tell you what. I'll build them at night. I'll start a little side hustle. I'll build these at night, and you sell them. I sell them through you during the day." And he says, "Okay, great." So I was fat, dumb, and happy. I figured trickle down theory that the profit the company makes on it will eventually get to me and everyone else in the company, which was a false expectation. But anyway, and everything went well. Well, then we had a product meeting coming up where we were going to talk about the next generation of products the company would sell. And I had this false expectation, this exaggerated expectation that I would be probably carried into that meeting on a chariot, fanned with grape leaves. And they would be like, "Please, Mike, tell us more, tell us more." So I gave them the next idea, which was a completely closed loop or zero discharge. The greenest tech you could ever get is nothing going down the drain. And then another employee gave another idea, which I thought was a stupid idea, but that was me. And my boss went with the other idea. And I turned to him and I said, "I think you're making a mistake." And here's the answer to your question, Jason. I said, "I think you're making a mistake." And he looked at me and he said one word, a small word, 4 letters, started with F, not that word. And that's the word that started my company. When I said, "I think you're making a mistake," he looked at me and he said, "Fine." That was an F-bomb to me. That was the most dismissive, just insult of for everything I had done, at least in my head. The machine we were selling was wildly successful, and he just went, "Fine, I don't care, fine." So at that moment, at that nanosecond in my head, I started my company in my head. I went home, complained to my wife about how unfair life is, and he doesn't get it, and he's stupid. Da, da, da. And she said, "Well, is it a good idea, Mike?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so. I think it's a great idea." She says, "Then why don't you just do it?" And that's all I needed to hear. I never really considered doing it myself. So I spent the next 6 months mad scientisting my way and developing the next generation of machine. And after about 6 months, I realized, okay, I'm coming pretty close to a production ready machine. I should probably leave the company. So I gave my 2 weeks notice and put in writing my intent. And I said, "Look, I may end up being a competitor of yours if my idea, gains traction. So I'm willing to walk out right now, but I'm also willing to give you a 2 weeks notice." And he asked me to stay for a month, and I did. And on my way home on my last day, I stopped by a small business park near my home and leased a small 1,200 square foot multi-tenant business park space and started the company.
Wow.
That was 1992.
Wow. And you call yourself a reluctant entrepreneur, which I think you just kind of explained. But what finally pushed you past reluctance and into leadership?
Oh, that's a long journey, Jason. That's, I've been in business now for 33 years. And I don't know, I think I started off, I wouldn't have called myself an entrepreneur, although I probably fit the description. I considered myself more of a inventor and a business person. I was working in my business. I was the chief cook and bottle washer. I did everything. I had no employees at first, and then eventually I built a team. But at the point where I started working on my business versus in my business was a good decade. When I started the company, I was faced with all sorts of challenges. It was like a video game where you start at level 10, you don't start at level 1. Everything was just coming at me, including a lawsuit from my former employer. He sued me, and we actually had to go to trial. And the little startup capital I managed to beg, borrow, and steal all evaporated within 2.5 months of being served. And so I was so focused on not dying, not killing the company. I was imagine one of those pitching machines going crazy, and it's just throwing fastballs at you, just boom, 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 like that. That was me. It was fighting the lawsuit. It was going up against this new trend called no clean flux. I'm in the cleaning business, and all of a sudden no clean comes out, and cash flow, and you name it. We were technically we were insolvent for probably several years, meaning if we had to cash out tomorrow, there would be a deficit. I lived on cash flow. I lived on lines of credit. I convinced customers to put down payments because I couldn't afford to take an order otherwise. It was just rapid fire, holding a giant fire hose and putting out every spot fire that was starting. It was not pretty. So at that point, I really didn't consider myself an entrepreneur. I considered myself a firefighter more than anything else.
Yeah. I don't know that you've thought about it or you did it on purpose, but you said you were technically insolvent. And I think that's very funny because it's a pun, because that's the business that you're in, right? All right. Solvents and cleaning. Isn't that funny?
You're right. I was in solvents. Yes, you're right. I was insolvents. Yes, you're right. I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah.
That's your next book title.
That's the next book. Welcome. Yeah. Just stay insolvent in the solvent business. Yes.
Well, so you mentioned that in the 90s, the no clean flux, and it promised that, of course, never wash boards again. So in the face of that, why did you double down on cleaning when the market was telling you and everybody that's dead?
Right. In our industry, there are 3 classes of electronics, what we call class 1, class 2, and class 3. Class 3, well, let me start with 1. Class 1 would be video games, electronic flea collars, consumer products where if they fail, nobody dies. Class 2 products are expected to be a little bit more reliable, office equipment, servers, things like that. Class 3 products they cannot fail. They are mission critical. If they fail, people die, or, destruction of property. Class 3 would be military, everything defense, electronics wise, aerospace, medical, high reliability communications. Those were all class 3. The class 3 people never stopped cleaning. They're just like, no, thank you. They knew better. Class 1 and 2, they thought they won the lottery. They're like, great, we'll stop cleaning. There's no requirement to anymore. But because I was a young company, there was still enough class 3 business, which is the smallest percentage of electronics manufacturing, because we don't build that many spaceships, and we don't build that many cruise missiles, and we don't build that many pacemakers compared to Game Boys and iPhones and things like that. So there was enough business there just for the class 3, just for the high reliability aspect to keep me going. because I knew they were not going to abandon cleaning. I was confident of that. And, 33 years later, they still have not abandoned cleaning. And fortunately, now, due to several factors, mainly miniaturization, boards are smaller today, components are smaller today, components are closer together. Their tolerance for residue is much lower than they were when I started the company. So now class 1 and class 2 manufacturers are coming back to cleaning. They're like, yeah, this used to work, but it's for some reason they don't understand why it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
And we know the answer. So it was worth sticking around because now we need all 3 classes in order to stay in business. But in the beginning, I was happy with just the scraps from type 3 or class 3 high reliability customers.
Environmental rules keep tightening. So what's the next regulatory curveball that OEMs aren't ready for?
I wouldn't say it's an environmental thing. Most of the process that we chose to use was to avoid solvents altogether, hence the name Aqueous Technologies. Aqueous means water. So we build water-based systems with water-based, not technically solvents, but we'll use the word solvent, water-based chemicals that remove all the residues. So they're not technically solvents. In the solvent world, there are people who still were hell-bent on staying with solvent. They didn't trust the water-based processes. So in the solvent world, they're in a whole world of hurt because every year more solvents are banned. And I don't really keep up with which solvents are being banned which year because we don't use them. But the alternative to water-based cleaning is getting smaller. The alternatives are getting smaller every year because there's constant bans and they're expensive. And they're usually relatively unsafe. They usually have flashpoints. They're flammable. A lot of environmental safeguards around it, permitting, air quality management, things like that just don't apply to our technology. So that's affecting people who are staying with solvents, which are not our customers. Hopefully they will be, but they're not ours at the moment. What's really affecting electronic manufacturers right now, big time, is miniaturization. There are components now, Jason, that are so small. If I took a quarter, the edge of a quarter, I could fit 4 components side by side on the edge of a quarter. If I dropped it on the ground, you wouldn't be able to see it. And these miniaturization is challenging because A, the components are so small, B, the equipment that automatically picks and places those components on boards has to be extremely sophisticated to be able to handle that. And the tolerance for residue is so low, you can't even have a dirty thought in your head without the boards failing. So everything needs to be like very, very clean. And that's challenging for our industry.
All right, folks, Mike's career is about eliminating hidden failure points. So let's talk about one that's hiding in plain sight, and this is your follow-up system. If you're like most founders, you pour time and money into prospecting, and then you watch deals fizzle because no one has the bandwidth to nudge them across the finish line. Well, Constant Closer, our sponsor for today's episode, fixes that. It's a done-for-you follow-up engine that automates every touch point, whether it's email, text, even ringless voicemail, so leads feel like you're everywhere at once. It tracks real-time engagement and surfaces the hottest prospects so your sales team hits the phones with total focus. And it closes gaps in your pipeline. Clients report 20 to 40% revenue lifts within 90 days. So if you're tired of leaking money between proposal and paid, head over to therealjasonduncan.com/constant closer. That's therealjasonduncan.com/constant closer. Schedule the quick demo and then just tell them JD sent you and watch your revenue become as reliable as Mike's circuit boards that he cleans. All right. So Mike, you've designed machines used on 6 continents. Which innovation are you proudest of and why?
Well, I'm hoping if global warming continues, maybe I'll get a 7th continent out there. Maybe we can put some machines on Antarctica. But until then, 6 continents. Repeat the question. What am I most proud of?
Which innovation are you most proud of?
Yeah, I think clearly for me, it's the environmental impact that we've managed to make. We pioneered the concept, which my boss said no to, of zero discharge cleaning. And when you have a water-based system, the water has to go somewhere. And we can't just use tap water to clean. Tap water, you can drink it most places, but we couldn't even clean with Perrier. I mean, that's way too dirty to clean electronic assemblies. So we have to clean with deionized water, which is basically water that is so pure it doesn't conduct electricity very well. But the goods, the upside, the environmental upside of water-based cleaning is you don't have to use these, nearly banned solvents, and it's safer. The downside is the water has to go somewhere, and it goes down the drain. So we developed a machine that would not put anything down the drain. It would recycle and reuse 100%. And that did two things for the world. Number one, it saved, at least in our business, it saves about 11 million gallons of water every year from going down the drain. And, I live in Southern California. We steal water from every state. We don't have any indigenous water supply. We basically, back in the 1920s, built giant canals, and we steal water from the Colorado River and pipe it all the way to Southern California to water our lawns and, pretend we're not in a desert. So to me, that also reminds me that not only are we not putting 11 million gallons of water down the drain every year, we're not using 11 million gallons of water. So, I'm a big believer that in business, the mission should be more than the sum of its parts. We're more than just selling boxes to electronic manufacturers in exchange for money. I'm a big believer that we need to make an impact in the world somehow, make the world a better place. And our make the world a better place is our tiny little company saves the planet 11 million gallons of dirty water going down the drain that someone has to put energy in to treat. And we don't use 11 million gallons of water every year. We use a fraction of that. So I'm very proud of that. Beyond managing to build a company and managing to stay in business against all odds, I think from a higher perspective, from a higher elevation, I'm proud of the environmental impact that we've managed to make. And I'm also proud of the fact that most of our competitors have followed suit. We were the leader of it, but that doesn't matter. I welcome that because I talk a lot about the business gods, and I don't mean that in a spiritual sense. I mean that more metaphorically. And the business gods are sitting up there looking down at my business, and I can see maybe there's a panel of 10 business gods, and 9 of them go, "This guy's awful. He deserves to go out of business. Let's just let him fail." And one of them goes, "Well, wait a minute. Look at all this. Look at all the good he's doing." So they give me a pass. So I think the business gods have smiled on my business, and even though I didn't technically deserve it for the longest time, insolvent technically, somehow miraculously the business managed to survive through the hardest of times. And I think that has something to do with the fact that we're doing something good, beyond just trying to make a buck.
You host 2 podcasts. So how has teaching others sharpened your own business decisions?
Oh my gosh. Let's talk about teaching others. In my world, we used to be braggadocious, obnoxious advertisers. I'm a marketing and sales guy at heart. So, we would run ads not far off, exaggerating a little bit, but not far off as, ours is the best and they all suck. And we did trade shows, we did about 12 or 15 trade shows a year. And some of those shows cost us 150 grand, to rent obnoxious waterfalls and hire magicians in the booth and do all the shtick. We were high-tech carnies, at a trade show. The problem is when the customer doesn't understand why their boards are failing. I can talk all day long about how big our pumps are and, how pure the water purification systems are on our equipment, and it doesn't land because they don't understand that's their problem. So we got tired of the sound of our own voice. And one year we just said, we're done. We're done advertising. We're done going to trade shows. We're done with all that. And we switched our model to education, because educated people make educated choices. And I find the best way to sell your product is to not talk about your product. Connect with the customer on an emotional level. And that happens to be why their boards are failing. And then just educate on the best practice solutions, not our equipment, just best practice solutions to mitigate that problem. And so we radically, overnight, switched to education. So we started, I went from downstairs at a trade show where we're standing in a booth trying to scan badges, trying to look for customers, to go upstairs in the conferences and become a speaker. And then I wrote columns for trade magazines and white papers, and started hosting technical webinars, which we call Tech Tuesday webinars, that have nothing to do with our equipment, just best practice and for reliability. Then I started a podcast called Reliability Matters, where I interview subject matter experts about how to make circuit boards and electronics in general more reliable. Nothing to do with my business. And what that ended up doing, I didn't realize it at the time, but I coined a phrase called conscious marketing, which turned out already to be coined. I invent things all the time that other people have already invented. And this concept called guided discovery, where we provide the data and then the customer can draw a line to the best solution. And that has worked miracles for us. We haven't run an ad or done an email blast other than to promote our Tech Tuesday sessions in probably 8 years. And our business has done nothing but increase. So to answer your short question in a long form, my experience in technical education has really allowed me to thrive as a host of a technical podcast, because I want to learn how reliability is impacted by poor decisions and things like that. And I'm able to guide my guests into that mindset when we're talking. And I tell all my guests, we're not going to talk about your product. We're going to talk about best practices, and I will include the company name and all that. Obviously, we're going to honor that, but this is not a sales thing. And that sometimes they're uncomfortable with that because they really want to get in. Call now. Operators are standing by, and I won't let them do that because I strongly believe that education and building authority in your space is what drives business. At least it did for me. And I hate to use this word, Jason, but become an influencer within your space. And I don't mean TikTok, Kardashian influencer. I'm talking about an authority-based influencer. And the podcast has allowed me to become that influencer, if you will, and gain trust with my audience because they know I'm not selling them anything. So I don't know if that quite answered your question, but
yeah, thank you. What is your one key to success?
For me, I have a lot of keys hanging on my belt, but for me, it was realizing when I'm making fear-based decisions. So many decisions I made were fear-based. If we had a cash flow shortage, I should say, when we had our cash flow shortages, I was really good. I'm good at sales. So I was really good at bringing in money, very good at bringing in money, not profitable money, but that's not today's problem. That's tomorrow's problem. So I would make all these fear-based decisions. We kept going to shows, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars every year because I was afraid of what would happen if we didn't. FOMO. I've made dozens, if not hundreds, of fear-based decisions that were perfect in that moment. If the only concern I had was that one thing, I could fix it at the cost of 10 other things. So I had to learn how to recognize what is a fear-based decision. And what I've learned, what a mentor taught me, is, let's say I have to make a decision. I'm at an intersection and I have to make a decision to go left or to go right. I really want to go left. I think that's the best move. But I don't really have enough money to go left or enough time to go left. So I think I'll just go right. My mentor said, what if you had all the money in the world? And what if you had all the time in the world? I'm like, well, I don't. They go, what if you did? I said, well, then I'd go left. She goes, that's the right decision. And that sounds so simplistic, but I think once, at least I, come to the realization that going left in this example is the right decision, then the money and the time take care of themselves. I have to make the decision that I am going to go left. I don't know how yet, but that is the right decision. And then I just don't think about going right. And things just start lining up miraculously. It happens every time. I don't know if we manifest it. I'm not sure what the mechanism is. I don't care what the mechanism is because I trust the process, and the process has never failed me. So taking fear off the table, taking time and money off the table, and just concentrating on what the right decision is to get your headspace there, and then things work out after that.
How do you personally define success?
I'm going to give you two answers. How I defined success when I started the company was money. I want my house on the hill. I want my supercar on the driveway. I don't know if that was my well, that would have been my benchmark definition of success. I don't think that's what I was after, but that's how I would have defined it. Today, I define it as freedom. Freedom. Now, freedom, financial freedom requires money, so I'm not discounting that. Personal freedom to do what I want to do, to make bold decisions without fear. Those are all things that I've managed to gain through kind of trusting the process. So I think success today for me is freedom, cast in a lot of different ways.
Based on that definition, do you consider yourself to be successful?
Yes. I'm in the point of my career now, after 33 years, where I've stepped back from the company. I own it. I own 100% of the shares, but my team runs the company, quite frankly, Jason, way better than I ever did. I was not interested in the details. I was just, I was the guy in the crow's nest looking over the horizon, shouting orders down on the deck, and doing everything I could that I thought I could do better than everyone else. And my team is into standard operating procedures and, detail stuff that I was never interested in. And I think entrepreneurs are typically that way. That's how I kind of realized I'm an entrepreneur. I'm not good at the details. I'm good at the vision. And my team loves the details. So what I do now is I go in about once a month, kind of for proof of life. They know to keep sending me checks. And I create content. I speak all around the world. I was just a few days ago, I was just in Amsterdam at a conference. And I speak on reliability, best practices, cleaning, obviously. I publish a lot of papers. I'm a columnist for a trade magazine. I'm in my glory. I just get to create. I'm not creating as many technical things as I used to, but I create content. And that content, it downflows to my business. So I'm still working. I'm working harder now in semi-retirement, or I shouldn't say harder. I'm working more now than in my semi-retirement than I did when I would just go in and sit at my desk and watch everyone do what they do.
All right. Thank you for that. Are you ready for some rapid fire questions as we finish up for today?
Sure. Go ahead and shoot.
All right. What is your clean room soundtrack? A song that you would crank while you were running tests?
The song I go to all the time that I just love to hear, it's never gotten old, is by Smash Mouth. It's Walking on the Sun. And not so much running tests, but whenever I'm walking, I fly a lot. I'm on airplanes all the time. And whenever I walk down a jet bridge, headed to the aircraft door, I play that song in my headphones, Walking on the Sun. I don't know why. It's not like the lyrics are meaningful, but it pumps me up and it gets me kind of in a zone that I like to be in. So when I used to do a lot of software coding. I was the original coder for all of our machines, and I'm a software hack. I'm not a good coder, but good enough because I couldn't afford good coders back in the day. And I would blast a lot of music, including that song, over and over again when I was heavy in a coding, episode. So I don't know. That song's just stuck with me for reasons I can't explain. It just affects me.
All right. One metric that you check every morning.
I used to check. I used to go on our books and log in and look at year-to-date sales comparative to the following year, year-to-date net profit compared to the following year. I don't do that anymore. I look at it occasionally, but I don't do that anymore. I don't have a metric that I follow daily, but when I do look at a metric, it's usually year-to-date comparisons to the prior year, just to see if we're on a trajectory. And every year except 2008, we've had an increase in business. Last year was our most substantial increase in business after all these years, which is surprising because usually you kind of taper, but last year was pretty substantial. And then I try and figure out why. Was it luck? Is it something we did? Is it in spite of something we did? And I'm a causation guy. I really need to know how stuff works. When I was a kid, I got in a ton of trouble from my parents because I took apart all their appliances to figure out how they worked. That didn't get me in trouble. What I got in trouble for was not having a great interest in putting everything back together.
Of course.
So I really struggle to figure out how things work and why things work that way. And I don't always get there, but that's what interests me. So when I do look at our finances, I do a lot of comparative analysis, and then I try and figure out cause and effect.
Well, Mike, thank you for being on the show today. If you guys want to talk to Mike or get in touch with him or learn more about him, go to mikekonrad.com, and Konrad is spelled Konrad. Sorry, Konrad. So mikekonrad.com. And if you're in the electronics business and you want to know how to get your boards clean and make sure everything's done, go to aqueoustech.com. That's AQUEOUS tech, TECH.com. Mike, anything else you want to say before we sign off for today's episode?
Well, if there's anyone listening that's contemplating starting a business, it's the toughest job you'll ever love. And the rewards are outstanding and the journey is rough, but it's worth it at the end. Stick with it. Don't stop. Be unstoppable and put the blinders on in terms of your determination and open them wide in terms of considering all the possibilities.
Mike, congratulations on all your success, and thank you for being on my show today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
All right, you know what time it is. It's time for another edition of JD's Public Service Rants. This is the part of the show where I call out the little things that shouldn't have to be said, but clearly they do. So if you're guilty of this one, well, consider yourself officially put on notice. Now, let's talk about this. Just because you can't hear yourself on the speakerphone doesn't mean the rest of us need to be a part of your call in public. We don't care about your cousin's drama. We don't care about your office complaints, or we don't care about what Karen did at brunch. If you're in public, bring it down a notch before we all take a vote on whether to intervene. If there's one thing I hate just about as much as anything else, it's people talking on the speakerphone in public. I don't care, and nobody else does either. Well, that's it for today's JD's Public Service Rant. If you've got an idea for one of these, send it over to me. And remember, don't be that guy. Well, there you have it. This is another successful entrepreneur that I got to interview and talk about his journey to success. And I really encourage you to go check out mikekonrad.com. Check out what he's built, what he's doing. Look at his podcast, The Reluctant Entrepreneur. I think maybe I'll be a guest on that show in the near future. You hear me talk to him about some of my story. But thank you for tuning in. Make sure you tune in again next time when I talk with yet another very successful person about his or her journey to success. And as always, until next time, I am the real Jason Duncan, and Jesus is King.
Attention business owners. Attention business owners. Feeling burnt out from running your business? Uncertain if you're nearing burnout? Take our free 10-question business burnout test at businessburnouttest.com to discover where you stand. With just 10 quick questions, you'll learn how to immediately begin making changes to regain freedom and success. Cut your daily operations time in half. Improve your quality of life and prepare your business for your future exit without losing revenue or profit. Visit businessburnouttest.com now and take the test. Thank you for listening to another edition of The Root of All Success with the real Jason Duncan. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, visit therootofallsuccess.com to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Follow Jason on social media at The Real Jason Duncan. See you again next time here on The Root of All Success.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.